the way in which he was fulminated by grace is something which is rather similar to what happened to St. Paul, for Norbert also was on a journey and on a horse and fell off it. In his case, it was during a terrible storm. We're not quite sure where he was going, but it seems that he had a friend and was going to see her. At the time, he was around 35 and was, because of the way things were done in the Middle Ages, on the scale of orders, because that allowed one to get into the ecclesiastical system of having benefices. He was a subdeacon and stuck there, and he was living a high life in the court, really, of the time. Because he was of noble birth and had access to the potentates of this world, a detail which later on was to be important. When facing what he thought was imminent death, as he crashed to the floor, he saw his life crashing before his eyes and realized, if I die now, I'm in trouble. So he got up a changed man and found his way to the bishop and demanded that he would be allowed to carry on with the order of things with regard to what he should be doing, being ordained. But the next stage would have been deacon, because he was subdeacon. Only he demanded more. He asked for both the diaconate and the priesthood without delay. And certainly, surprisingly, moved by a special grace, the bishop, who knew him, consented. And it is the basis of what is to this day referred to as the Norbertine privilege. Theoretically, one can be ordained in a hurried way between diaconate and priesthood in the Norbertine order. It goes back to there. So this was the beginning of what was going to be quite important. He did spend a while alone in a sort of eremitic life. It could have stayed there, but it didn't. He had a gift of attracting souls like a magnet, and he had a very powerful tongue, the gift of speech in public. He himself was German, but he was able to influence vast areas. It was in France that eventually he drew his greatest disciples, and there, again, in a miraculous way, he was shown where he had to be. Hence the name of premonstratension, because it comes from two words, pratum, monstratum, pre-montre. That is actually a green area, and monstratum, it means shown. So a foreshown or a shown place. Because when he got there, after being shown other places by the bishop, he knew in his heart this is to be the place. And so it was that they started building what became a big monastery. However, he was too quickly whisked off to become bishop, for him to be actually made really abbot of that community or to write its rule. He had a gift, a charism, and it was the first real abbot of Prémontré, Blessed Hugh of Foss, who wrote the constitutions of the order which gave them their base, but there was a strong monastic influence. St. Norbert knew St. Bernard of Clairvaux, the great Cistercian, and that explains how many of the Cistercian usages crept in. So if one went to a monastery of his, it would have looked very much like a Cistercian monastery, very strict and very beautiful liturgy, more so actually than the Cistercians because of one thing. He opted not for the Benedictine rule, but for that of St. Augustine, the rules of canon regular, because they are canons regular and not monks technically, because the big difference is this: they live from the fact that they're ordained. St. Benedict was not ordained, and his monks need not be. They can be, but they live from work, whether teaching or any kind of intellectual work or manual work. They have to be self-sufficient and the priesthood may be added, but it's not essential to it at all. The other way is quite different. Because of the centrality of his devotion to the Blessed Sacrament, the tendency was to ordain and therefore to live also from that fact. Massively they were priestly communities and they used it. Hence it is that when I was rescued there in France from Kilnacrot, when it came to the question of various things, it hit me strongly. All you've got to do is say yes and the rest will happen. And so it was. As soon as one was ordained, immediately the very day faculties were given for confessions, and that very day I confessed, and immediately one was sent around to do things in the area, but also, and this was not indifferent, even outside the country. The prior, for instance, would pass on very quickly to me all the retreats he couldn't handle, usually in France, because there was a whole circuit of monasteries that used to call us, and they were very serious communities, often in the old rite and very strict. And in fact, one of our circuit was one of the strictest monasteries, if not the most, in the whole Catholic world. The Victims of the Sacred Heart, who have never changed since they were founded. Extremely austere and very, very tough, but they're getting vocations. That's a little parenthesis. To say, therefore, that we were living from the fact that we were ordained. And therefore, that made a difference, because one was 100% what one was. All one's time was priestly. Basically, all that one did in one cell was to have input, which would be then output. It was intellectual, spiritual work, which then would come out in giving retreats, preaching, hearing confessions, and directing souls. Therefore, all one's time was given to the divine. Huge chunks of time were spent in choir, because coming precisely from the splendid origin where nothing was spared, and it was known to be the place on earth where the greatest possible glory was given to God in liturgy, we had that with incense every day, and the High Mass fully sung every day at 9 or 9:15 by the time we started, because the tour started first, always fully sung every word in Latin and facing east, and on the high altar. So that was the splendour that we had. And when it came to a Sunday, the splendour was so great that you would actually see people at Holy Communion, even young people, with tears in their eyes. It was a huge event which was able to reproduce on earth the Middle Ages for which that monastery was built. So it was quite an experience. And they would put out all the stops on the organ as well. So it was something which would really have an impact on souls. And they would come by the 100, and young people would also come by the 100. When it came to Easter, we'd have about 600 young people to confess, because we were outside in tents, like at Tese. A lot of work. We'd be confessing until midnight each night. So this was what was happening, because precisely one was living from the fact that one was ordained for souls. But then the other bit too was also central. It was the fact that the liturgy was the maximum. And we had an expression. It's every time that the choir, which normally faces each other, the two choirs face inwards, every time the choir faced that way, towards the high altar, the expression was versus ad majestatem. We were turned towards the majesty. And in itself it was a powerful word, ad majestatem. And everything there was indicating the centrality of what we were doing. Indeed, when it came to ordination, the word in the ritual for all that the newly ordained had to do was sponsus, 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 the spouse, the spouse, the spouse. It was the maximum, the ordination. So this then was what we had. And it's still there actually in the good houses of the order. There are very good houses right now where the full fare is offered. I've just had a very, very good Welsh friend who's entered a very good Norbertine monastery. It's in England, and they have a splendid liturgy. And also, they use the old rite quite a bit. They are getting vocations because they're authentic and they know what they want. They're orthodox, they're extreme reverent, and they give correct teaching. So it's a package which works. When you've got young people, other young people come in. Young people draw young people, so it's healthy. And when I was in Rome, I was living with the other Norbertines from around the world, and there was a huge corpus from America. they had houses out there. In fact, one of the houses paid for my studies. But the house that used to get most vocations, and to this day it's the case, is the strictest of all out there. It's in California, and they don't take people after the age of 35, and they get them when they're fresh and young, and they form them. And they have, as we had at Kilnaclock, the obligation of the Holy Hour individually every day, an hour a day before the Blessed Sacrament exposed, and they have a magnificent liturgy. And it really draws young people as well as people from outside to experience the other upon earth. And I happened to come across an article a couple of years ago in an Irish paper here, I think it was the Irish Catholic actually. There was a full page on them, I think, and I noticed how they were questioning people why they'd entered there, and one young person who hadn't long entered answered, "I came on a camp run by the brethren here, and I saw they had joy, and I wanted it." And so he's there ever since. Joy in the Lord. Not the happy-clappy joy, but the peaceful embrace of people who are in a state of grace and wanting the same thing, the creation of beauty on earth and healing for souls. Why does that work? I'll tell you why it works. It's because the Lord is free to bless. If you look around at places that are doing all kinds of things to promote vocations and nothing is actually happening, then one can ask, is the Lord free to bless that place? One can do all kinds of programming, but if the Lord is not going to be honoured as he wants, he'll send vocations where they'll be safe, where the honour will return unto him, where nothing will be told them which is not 100% true, where they'll be kept safe, where they'll be well treated, because there's nothing worse than ecclesiastical bullying. So, it could have gone either way in my own case, but I remember one thing that made the difference. It was a letter. I wasn't quite sure what to do. At the time I was in Ireland and things were really going wrong in Kilnaclock, and I wasn't sure what on earth to do. And this letter came. It was from this new foundation of Norbertines in Italy, and basically it was just saying, "Come over, we'll save you." And it was written in an expression of Christian warmth and sincerity, which made me realize the Lord perhaps is in this page. It could be the voice of God on a letter. So I went over and I realized the Lord proposes, but one is free to accept or not accept. One can make reasons to be questioning and so on, but if one calmly waits for the word from on high, sometimes things actually are far more simple than we think. And I remember it was one moment that made the difference. It was towards the end of the month, because I had a return ticket. It was after my weekly confession to the one who'd been looking after me, but now he's prior, and he gave me just a penance. It was reading from Scripture, and I remember kneeling down, reading this, and something whispered, "There is grace here. Do you feel it? Do you want it? Well, if so, don't do anything to stop it." And it was a very gentle nudge which made all the difference. So I didn't use the return ticket and stayed there and was ordained there, not long afterwards really. So that was what can happen if one doesn't put one's own spanner in the works. Sometimes we make huge complications when all the Lord wants is really docility and a simple word, "Over to you, Lord." When I was growing up, my brother was a great fan of Cliff Richard, and there was one great song, The Young Ones, but the other side wasn't bad either, and it was, and I leave it with you, it was the Shadows with him saying, "We say, yeah." Prémontré, a letter from Rome, and another from Sant'Antimo. St. Norbert, to be 'neath thy mantle yet,
and bathed in ancient light, to linger on a little longer where the ages met upon a dot or two, not wholly done, but chanted evermore. Ah, melody, to hear thee come again across the years, and call me home, where winged custody can hold me bound and safe from freedom's fears. 'Tis to be tugged by one last cord, too strong to be so quickly snipped. For dipped am I, not in a nocturne rave, but matins long that have oft sunk neath soft oblivion's sky. I cannot leave this land of foreshown beauty that becks one last hand.